Montgomery County actually filed an appeal, the Federal Court of Appeals, related to this issue. They filed that how can we be forced to put these small cells up when the FCC has not updated their safety limits since 1996? So because that had not been concluded, the court hadn't made its determination in court at the time. Andrew Friedson and others thought, well, how can we move forward on this? We don't have an answer from that court case. Now, what ended up happening was the FCC, that case was actually made moot, and the FCC said, well, we've made a determination, we have reviewed the docket, and there's no reason to update the limits.
May it please the court. I'm Eric Godding, and I'm going to be discussing the radio frequency, or RF, issue, and I'd like to reserve 1 minute. Montgomery County's concern is what the FCC has yet to say. In response to rulemaking comments that the FCC's RF exposure standards may not reflect the current safety research or account for this new 5G environment that we're going to see in the coming years, and that the FCC must resolve those issues before accelerating the siting and the operation of these 5G small cells on public rights-of-way, the FCC offered a single sentence. It said it disagreed with any concerns that Montgomery County or others have.
I guess the issue which has been raised in the 28J letters is mootness, given the completion of this rulemaking, which had begun much earlier. So why don't you address that?
So the burden in this court is heavy on the FCC. It has to show that there's no possible way for this court to give any relief. And so in our case, we're asking the FCC to explain in the context of this order why RF is either irrelevant or why it thinks it's important and how it's going to resolve this issue.
Why shouldn't you now? I mean, your complaint originally in the briefs was that the FCC should have completed this rulemaking.
Yes.
During the pendency of this appeal. They have now done that, and so why would you not raise any challenges you have to that rulemaking in a separate petition?
I would disagree that they have done that. They've done two things in those 6 pages where they close out the NOI. They talk about cell phones, which are not small cells, and then they have some conclusory statements that the record doesn't show that they need to update these RF standards. But nowhere in those 6 pages do they ever discuss the 5G environment. They don't discuss densification. They don't discuss the use of millimeter waves.
Yeah, that may be, right. But why wouldn't the appropriate process here be for Montgomery County to now challenge that other rulemaking? Because the thrust of the argument initially was they just haven't completed the rulemaking, but now they've completed it. So why wouldn't you may have good arguments against that rulemaking, but how do we dispose of them in this case?
Because we didn't get the relief. If we have to go back to court and take another year to litigate this, we're not getting the relief that we want, because it's our position that they actually haven't addressed the issue. Montgomery County wants to be able to tell its citizens it's putting these 5G small cells on its property. And the citizens are asking, is this safe? Or can we walk on our sidewalks? And if we have to go back and litigate for another year, that's a year that the carriers and the FCC is allowing these to be deployed. And so we have the evidence in the record showing that these may be dangerous, maybe they're not. But we don't have the answer to that question. And I think is...
We don't have the later action before us.
But they've raised the mootness issue, so I think the court now has the obligation to decide it. So, but I think on its face, I don't think the court has to do a lot of work.
Review the merits.
No, you don't have to.
It seems to me you're really disagreeing with the merits of that.
No, we're not disagreeing with the merits. I think on its face, they didn't address this issue. I don't think the court needs to dig into the record or anything. I think on its face, it literally decided not to address the issue that we asked, which was to clarify, is this a potential risk? Or isn't it? And so we can go back to our citizens and we can take whatever steps we need to take to deal with these new small cells. And so I think in the context, I think our case is rather simple. It's kind of an APA case. In this order, our order, not the one we were just talking about, they don't explain their decision. They had a single sentence. Despite the fact that you have this huge record of concern, of studies, of research.
So, counsel, in the other matter, the matter that's closed, is that subject to appeal? Have you taken a notice of appeal on that one?
Yes.
Being arbitrary and capricious? Is that pending, and where is that pending?
So there are two cases, one here in the Ninth that I know of, one here in the Ninth and one in the D.C. Circuit.
Are they going to be consolidated?
Yes, I think under 2112, yes, they'd be consolidated.
You know where they're going to be consolidated?
I think D.C. won the race to the courthouse.
And when are those going to be heard?
We don't know yet. They were just filed. So I see I have one more minute left, and I'd like to reserve that for any rebuttal.
Thank you.
So then that case actually became moot. And we actually expected that Montgomery County would have done the case that we are doing, which is contesting that the FCC actually reviewed the record, because it's quite clear that they did not. And during oral arguments, the judges were they grilled the FCC in court at the hearing, January 25th. 4 amicus briefs were filed in support of Environmental Health Trust et al. Versus the FCC. The Natural Resources Defense Council, which included elected officials in several states and Maryland, Joe Sondry, president of the National Spectrum Management Association, the Building Biology Institute, and Dan and Catherine Kleiber. I'll quote from the Natural Resources Defense Council brief. Numerous scientific studies were available to the FCC if it had taken its environmental review responsibilities seriously. Instead, the FCC stuck its head in the sand and did not even mention many of these studies of potential environmental harm in its 2019 order. And that amicus brief reviews the history of the wireless radiation standards in the United States. It is an absolute must-read. Very importantly, the NRDC brief was signed on to by officials, especially from Tacoma Park. Thank you, Tacoma Park, our mayor, council members, and also elected officials from Massachusetts, California, Hawaii, and Michigan. The amicus brief of telecom attorney Joe Sondry includes a declaration by Dr. Linda Birnbaum. Now, Dr. Linda Birnbaum is a 40-year U.S. government scientist. She recently retired after a decade of serving as our director of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. She's navigated numerous controversies about pollution and human health because the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences has conducted many studies addressing hot regulatory issues such as air pollution and chemical exposure issues. And in the brief, she talks about the importance of the National Toxicology Program study on cell phone radiation. I will quote her. The National Toxicology Program studies tested non-thermal levels of radiofrequency radiation for toxicological potential, including carcinogenic activity, and relied on controlled chronic exposures to levels of radiofrequency radiation that do not significantly increase temperature. Overall, the NTP studies demonstrate the potential for radiofrequency radiation to cause cancer in humans. What's really important about the NTP study is that the levels of exposure were non-thermal. So when you hear that there is no way that non-ionizing radiation could cause harm because the only harm it causes is heat, that has been proven wrong by the National Toxicology Program study on cell phone radiofrequency radiation. In her declaration, Dr. Birnbaum cites published articles by Dr. Ronald Melnick. Now, he is another NIH scientist. He has been working with the U.S. government for 28 years. And of course, he's now retired, and he's published on this issue because he led the study design for the National Toxicology Program study on cell phone radiation. Now that he's retired, he's given several talks on the relevance of the NTP study on cell phone radiation in terms of human health. And I'm going to share with you a short clip from one of many talks Dr. Melnick has made. He's one of Environmental Health Trust's advisors, and he talks about the relevance of the NTP study in terms of understanding 5G and radiofrequency radiation or wireless radiation and human health. This is a short clip from the end of his talk.
What does the public need to know? There have been multiple studies have found increases in cancer associated with exposure to radiofrequency radiation. This is animals and humans. Because of the widespread use of cell phones, even a small increase in cancer risk would have a serious public health impact. I strongly feel precautionary principles should be promoted by health and regulatory agencies, especially for children and pregnant women. The agencies in the US say, if you are concerned, that puts the burden on the individual. It doesn't say, we are concerned. It should be very straightforward. Precautionary principles should be promoted because, as mentioned earlier, risk can be greater for children than adults due to the increased penetration of the radiation within brains of children, and the developing nervous system is more susceptible to tissue-damaging agents. So finally, what is the lesson that should be learned? When dealing with assumptions, I think we've shown that assumptions in this case can be wrong, so that we should no longer assume that any current or future wireless technology, including 5G, is safe without adequate testing. Thank you.